He a little bookmaker shop up in Carlton. It was given to him by a local skilled seaman there, although of course he died 15 years ago. And he left it in his will, but Percy later on I did there, his roadside, which we did. Well, there was a big turn up of all the old radicals in Melbourne came to his funeral, and the police found this will there, and a man who was a friend of his came down to Percy and said he wanted James Coull and you to speak the funeral oration. And another gent came along and spoke there, a personal friend. He said, I just forget his name.
Was that related to Trotsky?
No, that wasn't the same one. That was at the crematorium we spoke.
Oh, I see.
And then, of course, the ashes. Of course, I think I mentioned that they had to be dealt with at on the Yarra bank.
Yeah, well, tell us the story there.
I think I did that in the first tape, did I?
On the tape, he told me.
Oh yes. Well, when he came down there, this old fellow Trotsky, he was what they call a ground debater. After the general meetings on the Yarra bank had gone, he felt so frustrated by virtue of not having too many of a hair to listen to his words of wisdom, that he'd gather a crowd around him, and having this pointed beard like Trotsky, he got the name of Trotsky, and he'd start orating to all and sundry on the virtues, mainly about himself and how the world was all cockeyed, and with more people like him on the face of the earth, everything would be all right. Well, nuts old chap he was. And a funny thing about this man, just before I go, he got knocked down by a car outside the Prince Henry Hospital. And the Butchers' Union took them out to he had been a butcher and a professional pugilist in South Australia. I think he was middleweight champion there in his young days. But anyhow, the Butchers' Union took the case up and he won, for the accident, £50,000. Well, my bald boy then, who things were very, very tough with him for a long time, he was always a good buck, but then he gets the man about 58 then, couldn't get the pension, obviously. And when he got this money, instead of putting it away and getting a little nibble at it now and again, my bald boy gets in the hands of some urgers, and he'd out with Fleming, cigar and a new suit. Oh, and after about 6 weeks, he'd done the lot. They just took him on, I suppose. Poor old fellow. So anyhow, he's on the Yarra bank this day with Chummy and shedding a few tears. And we had arranged for the meeting to be held. And Ralph Gibson and I was to talk there. And somebody else. And then we was to blow a whistle. I was to blow a whistle, and all the meetings on the Yarra bank was to stop. Because there was different meetings of different groups. They were to stop and come around the main party platform, which you had a lorry there talking in just as it is now where Mayday is. There was a big crowd there. And then we started off that Ralph spoke first, and then myself. I said that we were here to, as a sort of a day of remembrance of Chummy Fleming, just to say a few words about him and his activities and loyalty to the working class, which had never ever been doubt. And I call on him as more of a request from a personal friend of his to say a few words and distribute the ashes, which the Chummy had left in his will to be distributed on the bank. Well, I naturally thought he'd have a little box like a snuff box or a matchbox full of ashes, and you'd blow them as you generally see them do. But instead of this, there's another man's handed up to Tom, or somebody hands him up a McVitie Price's biscuit tin. So in this biscuit tin, a whole lot of sand and looked like powder of all sorts, flour and everything. And the funny thing, the wind, it was one of those windy days, it was carrying the message from the platform right out into the crowd. I can remember that well, real blowy. So he said, I'll now come to the performance. He said, as I now cast the ashes of my dear departed comrade to the winds. And he dived his hand into this McVitie biscuit tin, and he heaves the first of these ashes. Well, of course, this is blowing right in the front of people's faces. And he didn't just do one hand, he went on 3 or 4 handfuls and more hands. Well, by this time the people staggered back. They had Chummy in his eyes. They couldn't care less what happened till the wind's blown in the wrong direction. Well, Ralph Gibson jumped. He said, stop him, Jimmy, stop him, for heaven's sake. Well, I said, it's going to be a big difficulty. He's near the bottom of the tin. And Ralph said, thank heavens he's at the bottom of the tin. Should never have happened. Well, I said, there's nothing you can do about it now. So when he had to finish, there was a layer of about an inch in the tin. He took the tin, mate, and he shook the tin around as much to say that's the last ashes gone. Well, I thought that was the funniest thing that I'd ever seen on the Yarra Day. And a lot of people remember that, but oh, that was a funny incident. That was Trotsky.
While we're talking about Chummy Fleming, it might be of interest here to add something which another friend of mine told me about Chummy when she was a member of the Young Communist League in the 1930s, and she said that Chummy had sort of fallen out of favour with the May Day authorities, who weren't terribly keen on him playing a leading part, because anarchy, of course, was out of fashion in these days. Weren't very keen on playing leading part in the May Day march, but Chummy, of course, felt that he was very more entitled to play a leading part in the May Day march than anybody else. So, to the great infuriation of the Young Communists and the other organisers of the May Day march, the militant unions, when he was denied the right to lead the May Day march with his red banner, he had this great big red banner with, I think it had anarchy written on it in white letters, but certainly was a very large red banner, and he was a very small man. And he used to lurk in one of the side streets, Little Burke Street, Little Lonsdale Street, and as the official May Day procession used to come round the corner, swing round into Russell Street, and set off, Chummy would rush out from the side street, plant himself defiantly at the head of the march, all in front of the official May Day committee, their banners, and he would triumphantly lead the march through the streets of Melbourne, quite against the wishes of the people who organised it. And he was quite unrepentant. He felt that anarchy was the leading slogan which would be put by the May Day. Later on, when he got older, he lived to a considerable age. He used to take part in the May Day march on the back of an open tray truck. He'd sit there on a chair, carried through in the march, but not at the head at this time. He couldn't get to the head, with his holding up his big red flag.